episode, but people, want to, especially with this sort of longer form content, they don't want to just hear someone's perspective and then, never hear from them again. They want to like get to know that person. And that was something even interesting with us only doing a handful of these episodes. Our last guest went back and watched some of them, came in thinking that they already knew Jim, never having met him before, which it's kind of weird to hear that. But, that's the great thing about a podcast like this, especially from a business perspective. It opens up a lot of doors that, otherwise I like to think I'm pretty good at networking in person, building relationships with people, but there's a limit to, how large that network can grow, in person. So this is a way to expand that network essentially.
It is.
All right. And you're looking for headphones or?
No. You guys are going.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and actually formally get started. Sig, thank you for joining us today. I know we've met a few times over the last few years, but most recently...
It's up again.
Okay.
Goodness. Okay. We are back up.
All right. Well, Sig, thank you for joining us today. Just to give everyone who's watching and or listening a little bit of context. So we've talked over the last few years a few times here and there, but most recently re-met, I guess, at the state capitol building. You were receiving recognition from the Georgia state governor for your involvement in the Atlanta and really southeast and whole state of Georgia from a venture capital perspective, really putting Atlanta on the map, for lack of a better way to put it, where, Atlanta was always, since I've grown up, a place to open up new offices for companies outside of Georgia. But really, it wasn't until the last couple of decades, I feel like, until a lot more companies were incentivized to be built here in Atlanta, here in Georgia. And I think anyone that is familiar with this tech space here in Atlanta knows you're, a big reason for why that is. But before we get into the depths of, your involvement today, let's talk about Sig of yesteryear, right? You grew up in Jasper, Georgia. I don't think many people realize that, It's very rare for someone doing business in Atlanta to be from Atlanta. But can you talk about your upbringing from like the earliest days you remember? What are like some of your formative memories growing up?
Well, growing up in Jasper was interesting. We only had 2,500 people in the town, and there were 9,000 in the county. But I like to tell people I was kin to 85% of the people in town, cousins one way or the other. So everybody knew my business and everybody knew me. So you couldn't do anything without the whole town knowing. Great example of that is one day I was riding my bike down Main Street, and the car in front of me all of a sudden flopped. Well, I didn't see it flop. So I ran into that and got thrown up on top of the trunk of the car. I didn't get hurt. And in 10 minutes, my dad was uptown looking for me, wanting to know I was hurt, how I was doing, and all of that. So that was just what, I grew up with.
And that was, if I understand correctly, like through the telephone game, so to speak. It wasn't like the authorities alerted your dad. It was like just people in the town, news made it to him. And
right.
Wow.
And remember, they were pre-cell phone or anything, it was just
So you found yourself like in a day or so, people were asking you, "Are you okay from your accident?"
Yeah.
Like, how did you find out about it? How did you know about this?
Oh yeah. And it's like, it was funny. I posted something on the other day, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I got a response on Facebook. The kid who was in the car got back to me and said he remembered that
the
happened.
incident. Wow.
So would you consider yourself a latchkey kid growing up? I don't know if that was really a term that was used back then. I apologize to you to say that. But so like Brian, our producer here, he would often describe himself as a latchkey kid growing up, where basically during the summer, especially, you know, when school isn't going on, he was outside and, you know, not coming home until, you know, dusk. What was that like the childhood experience for you, or?
Reasonably so, and I probably came home maybe a little earlier. But I sort of grew up as one person described as a kid of the town. I was out and about doing things. You know, I used to run the concessions for Little League baseball. I did football. I did basketball. I mowed grass. I mowed sometimes 30 yards a week. I worked for department floors. And then by the time I got going to college, I worked in the local bank every summer. So I was out doing something. We spent the time outdoor, even it was just riding bikes and whatever. I had a little area down behind my house that they had graded out to build a building, and they never built the building. But I made a little bike track down there, and I would go down there and ride for hours. And it was just very, you know, I had kids my age around me, and we would go play on the streets and next door. You know, it was about being outside.
But now that's considered child abuse, right? Letting your kid go out and about on the town, you know, and that's something that I would hear my mom talking about. You know, she grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and, you know, a little bit more urban or suburban, you know, there than Jasper, Georgia. But she was able to get on the public bus and, you know, go from town to town when she was 11, 12, 13 years old. And, you know, it was just making me think, I don't think it was Jasper, Georgia, but somewhere up in like the North Georgia mountains, there was recently a news story about a mom who let her son go walk to like the local convenience store or something like that. And she got child custody services called on her. And it's like, even back when I was a kid, you know, we were able to at least walk freely within the neighborhood. But I started to see it in my time where the kids like right under my age group, they couldn't go past like the mailbox 3 houses, 4 houses down the road. And, you know, that is a whole aside, you know, from like a political perspective, but even from a business perspective, you know, we get these kids, you know, wanting to like go become successful in business or even just successful in life. You know, they turn 18 and, you know, we expect them to have it all figured out. And, you know, but we never give them a chance to figure it out as a kid, right? Because they all got to be in our sight, in our control. And then, you know, on the other side, I've heard this recently, there's all of this, you know, oversight in person, but then here's the tablet, here's the phone, and like, who knows what the kids are looking at online. And, you know, it's on one hand, you know, you want the kids to be prepared online, but not at the expense of forgetting like there's a real world out there that you need to go get experience in and, you know, figure out how it works. Because as important as what we were talking about before the show, you know, there's a real value to online communications that, you know, just you can't scale, you know, in the same effect with like in-person, face-to-face interactions. But that's again just a long tangent to say how times have changed since, you know, you've grown up. And
they have, because back when I was in elementary school, I would walk, and we had a path down through the woods behind the house that went over probably a dozen pieces of property. Nobody worried about that. I had my little path, and I walked over there and, you know, come home. And
you do that today, boy, that would be
trespassing and the liability.
If I can ask you, I'm curious. I mean, you mentioned about your working as a kid and all the, you know, businesses and stuff that you did and how involved you were with work growing up. I wanted to ask you, do you feel that is a fundamental thing and that contributed to your spirit of entrepreneurialism and your work ethic today and being involved with companies like you have been? Do you contribute your childhood and your interest in your involvement with work as a youngster to being beneficial and helping you today?
Oh, yeah. I don't think there are any questions. That when I was in, I believe, the 2nd grade, my mom would come and get me at lunch, take me home, change my clothes, lead me, and bring me back. My mom worried about my being dirty. And teachers Al told me later that I would come back and I would go clean out the gutters or do something. I didn't worry about how I looked or how I got dirty. And so I have always been doing something. Back in the elementary days, we used to get milk delivered to the cafeteria every morning. Well, I would go out and help. I got to know the milkman, and I would go out and help him unload the truck every morning. And he gave me a bottle of or a carton of chocolate milk.
Was it whole fat chocolate milk?
Yes, it was. Back in those days, we didn't worry about calories.
You didn't have 2% back in those days.
No. And so I have always just sort of been engaged and enjoyed doing things. Where it was the Cub Scouts, the Boy Scouts, or, I was the janitor at the local church that I went to. I have worked with the janitor at the high school. I have always just sort of been wanting to work. I spent a number of my summers working in retail type establishment just because I enjoyed doing it. Of course, it didn't hurt. I got paid, but you look today at what I made, wouldn't put a tank of gas in the car.
Yeah, but back then though, you were paid some, and you met a lot of people, and you I'm sure probably impressed a lot of folks. So this young man is motivated, or he wants to help, he wants to work. And I'm curious to get your viewpoints on this, because Jake and Brian and his team they're young entrepreneurs. And so a major question I had for you is what advice can you give to guys like him to be successful? And I think one of those things is to embrace work, which you did and have your whole life. So any other things? I'm sorry to steer like this, but I'm real curious to.
Well, I think the major thing is something that my dad taught me. When you got a job or a task, or whatever, do it, complete it, and don't worry about it's supposed to be a 10-minute task and it take you 20 or 30 or 5.
Right.
Complete it, do it, become trustworthy. Let people need to know that when they give you something, it will get done and they don't have to worry about it. And another interesting part of my growing up was my dad was in the used car business.
And he wasn't sleazy? No.
That then they weren't so bad. I started driving when I was 14 and had my own car. And I drove to middle school. And everybody knew it. And everybody knew I had no license. But the other kids' parents, nobody had a problem with their kids riding with me or anything.
Wow.
And so it was just a whole different world. And that come back to being trustworthy and everything, that people knew I would be careful.
So you must have had a reputation in town as being a responsible kid, or a kid that if parents didn't mind their kids riding in a car with you driving without even a license, there had to be some level of trust there and some.
Oh, yeah. Well, even some of the city council people would give me their car. Yeah, they needed something, and that send me to get it.
That's awesome.
So, a lot of people, they're really interested, from not just your work experience as a kid. What sort of student were you, and how important do you think it is to be a good student?
Well, it just sort of, I hate to say that, but it just sort of came natural.
Yeah.
The two worst grades I ever got, one was in handwriting. In elementary, my handwriting was horrible, and then shop. In my junior year, we had to take shop. I am not a mechanical person. I can't drive a nail in a piece of wood straight. It's just that's not my cup of tea. And basically, I had to take shop. Well, that did not help my GPA in the, let's just say.
Well, so, I asked that because, especially nowadays, our whole society to some degree, it seems like you got to be a good student, you got to maximize your GPA, but that's not really, obviously that's not saying you can't be successful also being, a student that tries to maximize your GPA, but there's a lot more to life, a lot more to business than just getting good grades or doing what you're supposed to. I mean, especially in the context of our business, the people that we like working with are as much of like, hey, this is what we need done. They can come in and tell us what needs to be done or what they're going to do by a larger understanding or a broader understanding of what we're working towards.
Right, yeah.
But one other comment that you made about, making money as a kid, I just got to know because similarly, I worked summers at a corn farm that like my grandmother was a part of up in Ohio. And so we would, hypothetically speaking, get paid under the table, cash $3 an hour, whatever the case may be. Thought that was great, at the time, we're rich as kids making but what was that like? Probably different scales of, what you were making, but to kind of like paint a picture, what was the purchasing power like for the money that you were making?
Well, it much better than today. A gallon of gas was probably 25 cents. And that was for a full service. You went in.
They showed up.
They showed up. They pumped it. They checked your air pressure. They would check your windshield washer fluid, oil level.
They would spray the windshield and wipe clean your windshield.
Right.
Those were the days. I remember that as a kid. I saw that as a little kid.
Right, because we didn't even think about that. It was, hamburgers were under 25 cents. You go to the movies for probably 40 cents, something like that. Popcorn were probably 10 cents a bag. So the whole level of money was just very, very different. And it had changed, of course, over time with inflation and everything. But you don't always notice it until you actually begin to pay for it,
Right.
It was one thing for my parents to pay for, food and so on. Now that when you get out on your own, then you really begin to notice how it changes.
And I guess speaking more to that, what was the process like from you, like finishing up school and you were having to make that next step in your life? Did you have, your long-term plan in life figured out from a very early age, or was it, somewhat trial and error as you were going from, high school or, school into the workforce?
Well, it was trial and error, except for one part. My parents said, you are going to go to college.
Okay.
That wasn't a option. So I went. The interesting part, I only applied to 2 universities, University of Georgia and to Imlay. And I got into UGA. And so that's where I was planning on going. So I had been accepted during the summer before I was to begin. I went over there. They had put me in a dormitory on the 3rd floor that had the vaulted tight ceilings. The room was designed for 2, maybe 3 people at most. There were 4 of us in that room. I took a look at that and I decided that wasn't going to cut it. So I had not been accepted at Emory, but they had offered to send me down to what is now what I call Little Emory, because that's what it was when I went down to Oxford, Georgia, outside of Covington. And I said that, and so I went, Oxford accepted me. I said, fine, that's where I'm going. Now, to show you how freshmen can have impact, the freshman year I was at Oxford, they did not allow freshmen to have cars. Well, there were a number of people, not me, I obeyed the rules, that brought cars anyway and kept them off campus. Well, by Christmas, they had so many cars off campus, they changed the rules and said, okay, we're going to have to let freshmen bring cars because we can't deal with all all the cars.
All the commuters, right?
Right. No, they weren't commuters.
Just
Okay.
the number of cars.
They would number a car parked off campus
Got it.
illegally.
Got it. Okay. Yep.
So we got to do that. And so they would get never a question of going to college. Now, I was very fortunate that Slater, Georgia gave me a scholarship, and that really made it much easier on my parents, particularly going to Emory, because Emory is not as cheap as UGA, and they were no hope at the time I came around.
I was just about to ask, was that a time pre-Hope? And yeah, now of course there's Zell Miller as well, which is great. I was also not, I was not able to take advantage of Hope or Zell for different reasons. When I was looking to go into study drones or unmanned aircraft systems, there was no program in the state of Georgia at the time. So I went to Middle Tennessee State University, and I was able to get in-state tuition there. But much like yourself, was not able to help my parents help me by taking advantage of Hope or Zell Miller, just different reasons. But I guess from a perspective of your time at Emory, what really stood out to you there? I mean, were there any teachers that really made an impact on you, or professors that made an impact on you, academic advisors, other students that you came to work with later down the road? Anything like that stand out?
Yeah, during my first 2 years, it was just the basic courses. And they were 2 or 3 professors who stood out for very reason, not always positive. I had one professor in foreign language. He was a judge, but he taught foreign language at Oxford. And he just had the weirdest sense of humor that just wasn't something that I related to at all. But when I got out of my 2 years, because Oxford was only a 2-year college, when I came to Big Emory, I still did not know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to do something with business. So I enrolled in the business school. I took my first accounting course, and I knew right then and there I was going to become an accountant. And I had a professor, Dr. Gary Ruoma, who he and I just hit it all. And we were just great friends during the whole time I was there, and even afterwards. And it was and many years later, I actually ran into his son at Chetry here in town. So I got to know his son as well. So
I just want to ask, in a brief answer, what is it about accounting that why did you know you wanted to be an accountant? What is it about accounting that?
Dealing with numbers. I have always liked math, and I had thought about being an actuary or doing something, but that just didn't seem to, nothing really grabbed me. Just about accounting and the logical way things happen. Sometimes they're logical, but most times they're logical. So I enjoyed doing that, and it came to me.
Yeah.
And going back to your high school, I want to just jump back real quick. And you said you got a scholarship, right? Back at that point to go to college. Were you a straight A student in high school?
Yeah, I had
Pretty much straight A's?
Yeah,
Were you studious in that did you study hard, or was it really just kind of a natural, the way you're wired, that you're perceptive and open?
It was more natural
Yeah.
than anything. I had one teacher in high school, and he liked me, and he and I were friends. But because I was on a number of different activities, we would have meetings during school, so they would be time that I could get to cut class. Well, any time that one of those meetings occurred during his class, the next day they were a pop quiz over what they covered the day I wasn't there. And the second one, I figured it out.
Yeah.
So I knew to be prepared. Because he hated for me to cut class. He called me the world traveler because I could find ways to cut class and do more things. And yet he and I were great friends. He was very, very intellectual. He was an English teacher. His view of the world and just his view of everything in the world was just wonderful. And he and I would sometimes sit at baseball games, would sit down for an hour and just talk. And so it was, he was somebody that I really enjoyed. But now he also graded very hard. To give you an example, we had to give a talk in class. And so we had, prepared, and I gave my talk, and he gave me an L on the talk. He failed me. And the reason why was because of my seat implement problem. He said in college that would have given me an L on my presentation. And so he gave me an L in class.
Wow.
Now, I worked my way around it and came back, but he was just that kind of teacher. Like we would read like Macbeth, and then the test would be, he would quote one line, and you had to tell who it was and under what condition it was said, and you got a 0 or 100.
Wow.
Now, if you got a 0, the next day he would give you a chance to bring that up and try again for 0 or 100 and average the 2.
Oh, okay. Well,
Did
that's
it-
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was,
Tough love.
A little water clears us of this deed.
yes.
Remember who said that? That was Lady Macbeth.
Oh, okay.
Something like that. Either a little water clears us or a little water erases us, or something like that. Because he had blood on his hands,
Right,
Macbeth.
but then you would have to say under, what would the circumstances around.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, see?
We had to read Macbeth too. For me in high school, we read Macbeth, but
I'm not familiar.
Wow.
Yeah. On your childhood, so outside of school, I know you were doing a lot of work. What sort of pastimes did you have as a kid growing up? Like, was it all just when you weren't in school, skipping school, you were trying to find some like work activity to do? Or like, did you have a group of friends and maybe go like off-roading or whatever? Not that I ever did that.
No, finding things just kind of came, I get natural. I did have a group of friends that we would play together, but then, I just went and it was easy to find things, and I just, Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, working in the church, and, probably most of it came around work or some kind, or being involved, maybe more being involved in things.
And just so, from capturing history perspective, what were the names of your schools that you went through? Do you remember those? Like, how was Jasper structured? Was it one high school for the county, one middle school, one elementary school? Or, can you talk to that?
Yeah, well, where I went, they were only 2 schools. It was Jasper Elementary, and they were Pickens County High.
Okay.
Now, when I grew up, it was a very segregated environment. In fact, if you look at my elementary and high school, no minorities of any kind. Not even, no white, Latinos, it was all
Right.
just, and
Looked like this table right here.
right, but in my county, the blacks had their own elementary school, and they were also a separate high school and a separate church that they went to. And so, my simply was elementary and high school, because the high school were both middle and high.
Okay. And I guess then leapfrogging back to post education. So you're at Emory, just finished up your couple years there, realized accounting was, your real calling. And then as far as I understand, you went almost immediately to work with John Imlay. Is that correct?
No, they were a brief period in between.
Okay.
When I came out of Emory, I went to work for KPMG, Pete Moore Mitchell. I survived 8 months there, And I decided that auditing was not my cup of tea. Accounting I liked, but auditing I did not. Primarily because I kept being assigned to multiple jobs on the same day, travel all the time. My first personnel review came over the telephone. They said, we'll talk to you more when you come in. I came in, never heard the word Slender. But I said, they just kept putting me on multiple jobs. They just didn't have their act to go, and that didn't make me feel good. So
Right.
I got the opportunity to join a company called MSA. And that was I actually joined them twice. I joined them because they needed a body, and Pete Marwood had me a body at that particular time, so they assigned me over there. So I worked for MSA for a month, and then they offered me a job, and I took the job.
Were they a startup? Was MSA essentially a startup, or how established were they as a company?
They were trying to go public.
Okay.
Now, they probably had no business trying to go public once you took a little look at everything. And so I went there, and John came in about the same time that I did. Now, I knew him, but I didn't really know him. You know everybody in the company.
Right.
So I was employee number 700 in the company. And MSA was growing like wildfire. So on Saturday, they would have recruiting sections, and they would bring in 10 people, 20 people, and they would be interviewed by 8 people maybe. They just kept going around. And the story used to be that unless you wore white socks, you got hired. But anybody who showed up in white socks and a suit probably didn't make it, but otherwise, they were just employing people all over.
Wow.
But MSA had begun in 1963 by 4 Georgia Tech grads at a consulting company, and they had evolved over time into a healthcare consulting company, a general consulting company, a executive recruiting company, a advertising company. They were a key punch company. You know what a key punch is. They were a data center company. They even had a data center that they ran in North Georgia and Dalton, and they had a kitchen cabinet company. And that is what we're trying to go public.
Gosh.
And they were losing tons of money, and they were developing software.
Wow. Okay.
And they had like 40 different software packages that they were working on at one time.
God, wow.
It sounds like almost a amalgamation of like Google, Berkshire Hathaway, and just too much. Yeah.
Everything but the kitchen sink.
Well, they did do kitchen cabinet.
Yeah, kitchen cabinets.
And why we ever were in the kitchen cabinet, nobody could ever tell me.
Hey,
So that was where John and I both joined. Now, John got terminated twice and rehired. Got rehired twice more. And so, but my employment, I got employed by the company. I was there the whole time.
and so I was talking with Jim. We did some of this setup last night, and we were talking about what I read about John Imlay, that he was a very aggressive, or maybe aggressive, but intense leader, right? And I think I read something about him bringing like lions or tigers into meetings. Can you talk about that, or in your experiences working with John?
Oh yeah. No, John was the ultimate salesperson. If you want to sell ice to an Eskimo, John could do it. John was very creative. He had a great sense of being able to read people, figure out what they need, and he was a great people person, great motivator. We took and we can come back to it, but we took MSA into a bankruptcy in 1971, and we came out in 72. And in December of 72, he held a company-wide meeting, and we brought everybody and their wives and our husbands or whatever in to town. And we held it at the East Lake Country Club. Well, he had not told, there were a few of it who had an idea of what was going to happen. But we were in a meeting, and we heard the racket outside. It sounded like somebody had dropped a tray of glasses or something. Well, tell me what it was the trainer was bringing the tiger into the East Lake Country Club because it was going to be a surprise to everybody to see it. Well, they were the waiter that East Lake, you may know, had a basement and a main well. He was coming up from the basement carrying a tray of glasses. And the way the story goes is he came up and turned and looked, he saw that Bengal tiger coming through the door. He dropped that tray of glasses and got out the back door before the tray hit the floor because they had not been told that the tiger were coming.
Yeah, from a perspective of motivation, that's the motivation to get out of Dodge. But from the perspective of, I guess, just getting the company in order, right? I mean, that's a very, to your point, creative sort of way of like waking people up. Like, hey, this isn't like, I've heard, from other companies, I've heard some of the inside baseball, so to speak. And, it's like, people, especially once a company gets to a certain size that, everyone's making a good salary or whatever, it's very easy to get complacent and, just let it become a bureaucracy. And everyone essentially becomes a parasite, to the company, where everyone should be providing value and, really double or triple the value of what they're extracting from the company, right? But that might be a little bit of an extreme case, but to me, that seems like a very oh yeah, everyone wake up. We're not just here to, collect paychecks, right?
Well, it worked because every year at our sales meeting, John had a different animal. And it actually got to be kind of the game. What animal will we see this year? Because we went from Bengal tigers to race horses, to sharks, to eagles, to bears, to chimpanzees, a baby elephant, and then we had a couple more tigers along the way. Now, and we were very fortunate that nobody got injured because we could actually came up and could pet the, okay, you couldn't pet the eagle, really, but you could like the tiger, and so they actually had it tamed, or not tamed, but had the trainer there. You could come pet it. Now, sadly, it ended on a somewhat serious note in that it did when John was retiring, the company that bought it, Dun & Bradstreet, gave him a big going away, and so they brought a Bengal tiger to the event. And unfortunately, the trainer, a lady came up before the event and said, "Can I pet the tiger?" And the trainer said, "Yeah, walk around, do it." Well, either he didn't have the tiger seduced properly or something, and the tiger bit the lady's leg. And that sort of ended that. But to show you the creativity that John had, he went to having a master violinist come and play. And he had a particular piece that he had the violinist play at future meeting and so on. So he replaced the animal with something else that was just striking.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing piece that the violinist played.
How was his
attitude of managing his sales team? Was he a demanding sales manager, or did he have high expectations? I'm sure he did, but I'm just wondering if you could talk about the expectations of the sales team, specifically the sales. I'm interested in that. My background is in sales,
Yeah,
so
well,
I've been
we set budgets every year, and of course we had the typical structure with John at the top and VPs and regional manager. But he was reasonably demanding, but
not a slave driver.
not a show driver, because over the period of time you talk about pricing, and so originally packages began at $100,000. Well, it wasn't that long until they became $1 million, and then you bought a combined 4 or 5 packages. You could we had one particular quarter. It was a fourth quarter, and they were 5 $1 million deals that shipped into the next year. Now, nobody was happy about it, but it was all different salespeople. It wasn't just one salesperson that happened. And so, John, he let be known he wasn't happy, but at the same time, he didn't. It wasn't like he went out and flirt anybody because of it.
So he was respected as a leader.
Tough love.
Right, yes.
Yeah, but respected as a leader, high standards. But
Right.
I've seen all kinds of sales managers. I've been a sales manager myself. It's a tough job.
Oh, yeah. No, I know a couple who were very tough under him. And
Do you know the name Newt Collinson? Have you ever heard that name? Connect. The company Connect.
I know the company Connect.
Connect. Well, it's a meetings and events company. And
Right.
I retired from that company after 20 years. Chris Collinson was the young man who took over his dad's business. His dad hired me in 1999, and I was there for 20 years. The company went through about 3 or 4 different changes. It morphed. We had to adjust with the market. Started out as a magazine advertising rep firm and wound up being involved in putting on conferences, and we did all these marketing packages and got really creative in the sales space. So I'm curious about the sales angle. But anyway.
Well, to give you an example, the company came up with a slogan that people are the key. And everybody got a Tiffany key when they came on board. It was a little silver key that were about yay big. And when you had been there 5 years, the men got a gold key, and the women actually got a brooch type thing, silver. And at 5 years, you went to gold, where it was the key or the brooch. And they were always humor about people who didn't show up with their key. It was never said that you had to wear the key, but it was said you had to wear the key. So one day on the elevator, John got on with one of our regional managers, and guy didn't have a key on. And so John turned around to him and said, "Andy, where's your key?" And Andy saw me. "I went on my pajamas. Sorry about
That's great.
it was intended that, but people are the key. They really tried to push that because in the software business, while you got software, people had to develop software that had to support it. And so people were really your big asset.
Now, so this is something that I see. I don't want to call out names because they're pretty big here in the Metro Atlanta tech space, but I've gone and done some tours at some facilities, and they'll all try to push, some sort of mantra, if you will, or like some sort of like people is the key sort of messaging. And on one hand, of course, you want to have like a culture that is adopted by the people within that organization, or in the case of like a co-working space, the people that work there, even across organizations. But at the same time, it's like show it by action, right? To me, a lot of these sort of takes that people have, like the virtues that they have or the values that they have for their company. It's great that you have it in writing and you put it all up on the walls and everything, but if you're really having to hammer it home all the time, just verbally, it's almost like it's fake, right? lack of a better way to frame it, where it just seems kind of disingenuous versus, and I'm not saying in the case of like the key example, have you seen any examples in your work history where it maybe goes over the edge of being like, hey, this is a good value that we want to instill in people versus, hey, this is maybe a good value we want to instill in people, but it's really just kind of lip service?
I have seen company where it was nothing but lip service, but you can see it in the organization too.
Yeah.
You don't see the same
Right.
dedication and so on from the employees. Because, and most people though, and I will say that most people, I think, really believe in some sort of culture
Right.
where it on the wall, where people are the key or whatever. One of the first people I remember seeing put on the wall was Charles Brewer of Mine Spring.
Okay.
He had it in his outlet on a chart. It was like a 7-point thing. And he really believed it.
Right.
And he didn't push it, but it was there just as saying, this is what I believe.
Right.
I was a sales guy, as I mentioned, and we called on a lot of individual companies, but we also called on advertising agencies, right? And I just will real quick comment. I could go in and meet with a media buyer, which is a person down the totem pole, right? They have the media department and then the accounts department. The accounts guys work with the clients, the advertising agency's clients. The media department, they do all the number crunching and they put together the media plans. And you have these media buyers, and then you have supervisors, and you have a media director, and the media director usually reports to one of the top officers of the company. I could go in and meet with a media buyer and get a sense of the culture of the company. And it was amazing, the difference. Some ad agencies, the attitude, it was just very different. And it all flowed down from the top. That's something that I remember from my total 25-year career in sales, but 20 years with this company here in Atlanta. Anyway.
And yeah, that's what I was trying to get at is like those cultures that really, it oozes throughout like all of the people. It's because of the action of the people at the top, of the organization.
Whether you like it or not, it
Right.
happens. So if you have a strategy and you have a slogan or something, people are the key, whatever it is, and you really believe that, it does filter down, kind of whether you like it or not, if you really believe it.
Yeah, it does. And
Now, but building on that, into working with John Imlay more, so you were working with him at MSA, if I understand correctly, and then how did it go from you guys working there together to Imlay Ventures coming about and you working with him there?
well, in 1988, CA attempted to do a hostile takeover.
And CA, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar.
Computer Associates.
Okay.
Sorry. Attempted a hostile takeover of MSA. And we were I believe, the first company to rebel their takeover attempt. They have been known to take over a number of companies. And we won in that. CA had a very bad reputation. They took you over. They did not care about employees, and they did not care about customers.
Not a good combo.
Not a good combo. So we were able to come out of that. But as part of that, we saw we needed to do some things in the company. We needed to do some porting of our software to write the AS400 and some of the more mid-sized machine. Well, you can't just port it. You had to rewrite it. That was going to be tens of millions of dollars. And another company called McCormick and Dodge would come into that same conclusion. They were our number one competitor. They would come into the same conclusion. And the head of McCormick and Dodge, they were owned by Dun & Bradstreet already.
Wow.
And the head of Dun & Bradstreet was a good friend of John. He approached John about buying us, combining the two companies, only having to do one rewrite of software and doing eliminating some military function and so on. Well, that was an interesting opportunity because MSA and McCormick and Dodge had a hate-hate relationship. And I do mean a hate-hate because MSA was a better sales organization, but McCormick and Dodge were a better technical organization. But at the McCormick and Dodge sales meeting, they would hold a mask of John Imlay and boo it.
Wow.
And then McCormick and Dodge gave out a special sales award to the salesman at McCormick and Dodge that could sell the most against MSC. It was really in fact, to give you an example, the day the merger was announced, a couple of our salespeople called John and said, "Who do we hate now?" Because that was it was friendly, but it wasn't friendly.
Yeah,
right.
You know what I mean. And so that acquisition, we concluded the agreement the week of Thanksgiving of 1989. We closed in early 1990, sorry. And so and it made sense because it was going to take a lot of money to do what needed to be done. So we went through a transition period, and I was on the transition team. And I had gotten an employment agreement with Dun & Bradstreet because I was the second longest employed person at MSA, and I knew where all the bones were buried. And so they needed me to a certain degree. But John came to me about 5 or 6 months and said, "Okay, Sig, we know you got an employment agreement. You can sit here and draw your paycheck." So I get it with 2 years or 2 years, and then you'll be gone. But in the meantime, you can't make any decisions because, they didn't need a secretary treasurer that I had become at MSA because they had all of that written D&B. And so he said, "You can sit here and not make any decisions and, attend the transition meeting, but really not be able to do anything but draw a paycheck. Or I'll help you figure out how to get out of your employment agreement and you can go do what you want to do." Well, I knew that John had wanted to have a family office environment. So I proposed to John that we create his family office and I would run it. And we sat down and worked through the details of it. And the way what happened was John got D&B to agree to let me out of my contract, but then since I was working for him, he could bring me back in whenever they needed me, and he agreed for 2 years to do that. I even took a trip or two to Europe for a week or two to do D&B things while working for John. But, that was all part of the agreement we came to.
Right.
So in August of 1990, we created Imlay Investments. We already had the Imlay Foundation of what I was managing. And then part of what John wanted to do, we wanted to give back to the entrepreneurial community in Atlanta because it had been very good to MSA. We had employed over 1,200 people here at times and had gotten good talent out of Georgia Tech, Georgia State, UGA, and maybe Emory to a certain degree. So he wanted to give back. So we started doing what wound up being angel investing. It really had no title at the time. It was just individual investing in companies. And so that is what we decided we would do. So I came out of D&B and set up the office. I was managing all his public money and everything and foundation. But then we began doing the angel investing, and we made one investment in 1990. And we didn't really have to worry so much about pipelines of companies because we had hundreds of MSAers in the community.
Right.
And they could bring their opportunity.
Wow.
In fact, the first investment we made was in a company called Audio Slacks, and one of our senior VPs of sales had found the company and had made an investment and brought it to us to invest in.
It's like you had a sales force, a
That-
free sales
that's
force
right.
working. Yeah.
Right. And not only sales, but technical, because we had technical people in this deal that if I needed some help on due diligence,
Yeah.
I could find somebody who knew something about it and could employ them to come help. And the second investment we made, and I can't remember the name of the company, I should go back and find it one day, was the former head of Petrie Software we had bought, had created this company and came to us, and we funded him. So we had the capability. A lot of time, one of the biggest trouble angel investors have is finding deals.
Right.
Particularly back in 1990, because you think in 90 there was no internet. So, you didn't.
Very isolated.
Very
Yeah.
isolated. We were still had a hard time necessarily finding things without doing it the old manual way. So,
And just a real quick aside, I don't want to take you away from the topic, but the term angel investing, was it known then, or has it since been?
it has since been known.
So y'all were in a territory that was totally unknown. It was the Wild West in a lot of ways.
It was.
Did anybody think you were crazy for making some of the investments that you're getting involved with these companies, these startups, or whatever?
Oh yeah. And some of them we probably were a little crazy, but you get educated. 'Cause remember, I had done acquisition and divestitures at MSA, but I had never looked at a single company as an investment. So
Right.
I was running what I was doing as I was going.
Yeah. You didn't come up with the term angel. Did you yourself
No,
come up?
no,
Okay.
no,
Because you are called the Godfather of angel investing.
Yeah, no, the angel investing term came along somewhere, probably more in mid-90s,
From Wall Street? Probably came from
West Coast.
West Coast. Okay. So it's a technology. Yeah,
It really
Silicon
became
Valley.
more a technology type
Yeah,
deal.
yeah.
Because the West Coast, that where you get most of your changes in the technical world, as far as titles and so on.
Until not just titles. I mean, a lot of like the technology itself. As great as like this environment has grown around here, I mean, a lot of it isn't necessarily technology businesses being built as much as it's businesses being built and scaled with technology.
Right. Well, that is one of the major differences between the Valley and most other places.
Right.
You look at the Valley, it's all technology.
Yep.
Technology went away, the Valley would go away.
Right.
In Atlanta, if technology would go away, Atlanta would just keep right on beating. Because we are probably one of the best diversified cities, major cities,
Yep.
to be able to survive downturns
Nice.
and so on. Because,
Culture, healthcare, like culture from a music and art perspective. Yeah.
Coke,
Coke,
Home
yeah.
Depot,
Right.
you just got so many other companies that are not, they use technology, but they aren't a pure technology company.
Yeah, and that's a great from the perspective of diversification, but it from a ecosystem perspective where someone like myself is building a true technology business, right? There's just none of the success stories from the West Coast cities, or even in Texas and Austin to some degree with the likes of Dell, right, a computer company. We just don't have any of those experiences here in Atlanta, other than maybe if you look at CNN as a tech company at the time, still obviously a media company is how most people think about them. But from a technology perspective, no one was doing, 24/7, broadcast media in the way that they were. And that was a technological achievement at the time, even though we may not think about it as such, or younger people may not think about it as such, because nowadays, if it's not a computer, if it's not the internet, most people don't think about it as technology.
Well, Ted Turner is one of the true visionaries that we have had here in Atlanta, because pre-CNN was TBS.
Yep.
And if you think about how how the Atlanta Braves have gotten to be so well known, because he owned TBS and he bought the Braves and he put them on there.
Right.
They were broadcast all over the U.S. And he had the vision, not only CNN, but Cartoon Network. You can just name the different things that he had helped create and bring together. While maybe not true tech, it was a true visionary of a sort that is unknown.
Well, isn't he the guy? I love this. Isn't he the guy that we credit with giving us 24-hour news?
Yep.
Well, that could be considered a blessing or a curse.
Well,
Some people say that if there isn't a story, you kind of create a story. I don't want to go in down the anti-media, but it is very broad spectrum and lots of anyway. But I agree with you that Atlanta, the type of city we are.
Yeah, and I would love to see more of those visionary type people build their businesses within Atlanta. I've been told hey, why haven't you gone out to California? It's because I want to build Atlanta to be the city that people are coming to and building their businesses. And I mean, obviously this is very grandiose, but looking at the same effect that Henry Ford had on Detroit, I think we could have the same effect on Atlanta with the drone industry across the country, right? Obviously, again, that takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. It took many decades, right, for that to happen in Detroit. Given it then took, a century or many more decades to unwind it, right?
Right. Well, we, at least in my opinion, we had to change the Southern culture.
Yes.
I don't think our Southern culture lends itself to that kind of creation.
Yeah. Are you talking about the segregation and the?
I think just the work culture.
The risk culture. We don't have the same amount of risk taken that you need to have to do what you want to do.
Right.
Because you think about it, you look at Google, Microsoft, Dell,
Apple, HP, yeah.
You don't have a single one of those in the Southeast.
So none has ever been missed out on, right? And that's, again, I don't have the same experience, obviously, that you do, but oftentimes it's not, aren't you afraid of looking at an idiot for investing in that company? More often than not, you're afraid of looking looking like the idiot for missing out on the big company that came through, right?
And people here, they will sell out sooner.
Yeah.
And both VCs and angels will sell out sooner and be happy with a lesser return than the West Coast, particularly.
Right. We're here, as I often hear it, a 10x return over 3 to 5, maybe 5 to 7 years is good, right? But 100x is oftentimes the minimum return that the more traditional VCs out on the West Coast are looking for. It's like they really look at it. We have one company that's going to pay off the other 100+ companies we invested in.
Yeah, and they just take more risks. They're willing to take more risks. I know one VC firm. They had offices in Boston and in the Valley. And they eventually wound up dividing the firm into two because the partners on the West Coast wanted to do different and more creative investing than the partners in Boston.
Why is that we're less inclined, especially I would think the Northeast is more inclined to be riskier than the Southeast compared to the West? Why is it that we're not
is a cultural thing.
Please add on to this, but what he just touched on, I think, is the key. We don't have the successes that these other markets have had, right? Even like a New York, IBM came out of New York, right? And so there's a big successful technology company like, hey, this is possible to happen here in our backyard, where that's never been proven here in Atlanta.
Well, I'm just confused because lots of people in this part of the country have great ideas. Why don't we have an Apple, some kind of a Apple equivalent here? I mean, we have Home Depot here.
Right.
So
But they non-technology.
Right.
Non-technology. So you guys are talking about technology.
Yes.
Oh, I
Right,
see.
yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, because you look at Coke, you look at Delta,
Yeah.
you look at Home Depot. We have the capability of doing it in certain way and certain industries. Technology just hasn't been one for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And I think it really had to do with the amount of risk that you had to take,
So are you saying that people in this part of the country are less inclined to they're more averse to risk with technology? Because if you're a bright young kid with technology, you move to the valley, right? You move to the West Coast because that's where all the action is. Yeah. So, and you're kind of coming across to me as being a young person in this part of the country that is not afraid to embrace technology and go for the stars, kind of thing. Is that?
And yeah, because again, what you're talking about with how great of a city Atlanta is from a diversification perspective. I think of Atlanta and really this part of metro Atlanta, like the Alpharetta, Forsyth County, North Fulton area, it's probably not the number one place to live from any metric, a quality of life perspective, but it's in the top 5 of everywhere around the world for like best place to raise a family, best place to start a business, best place for weather, best place for, low crime. I mean, you can go every quality of life metric and we're going to be in the top 5, top 10. And I think that's very unique from anywhere else around the world. You go out to San Francisco, you have more career opportunities in tech than anywhere else, but the price of living, crime rates, all that suffers, right? You have great weather, but I think Atlanta, especially this part of Atlanta, is very special, and I would like to be a part of putting that on a map for more people.
Yeah, interesting.
But look at the Southeast from their viewpoint. How many public companies are they that are tech companies?
You have any guesses?
I don't have any guess.
Any public companies in tech?
Do you know? Do you actually know the answer? I mean,
So,
I know my answer. It may not be.
You have a general idea.
stockanalysis.com says the technology sector has a total of 811 stocks.
But how many are in the Southeast?
And let's see, in the Southeast USA. Let's see. See, 192 in 2025, but I don't think that's actually public. Let's see, Inc. Regionals. I'm not seeing a very clear answer. Let me see if AI has a clear answer, but it's a fraction.
A very tiny fraction of the number of public company that are technology company compared to the other regions.
Yeah.
You look at Washington, New York, Boston, Chicago, Austin, Now, some people might argue Austin is Southeast, but
It's different.
We can debate that one.
Is Dell is headquartered in Austin, right?
Correct. And
That could be. And of course, now you have a Flamer car company in Austin too.
Tesla, and then I know. I don't know where it stands in Georgia. We were supposed to get a Rivian plant, I think out towards the Covington area, but I think that's been put on hold maybe.
A plant.
Right. It's not a headquarters.
It's not a headquarters.
Right.
Yeah.
But so going back, I know we've jumped around here. Going back to where you started working with John at Imlay, you said Imlay Investments, but then Imlay Ventures became like the VC arm of the family office, or am I getting the name incorrect?
Well, names don't always indicate. Imlay Investment was the name of the family office.
Okay.
All of the investing in deal angel that we did was done in John's personal name.
Okay.
He didn't. We did not create
A fund.
a fund or an LLC or anything. We did it in John P. Imlay Jr.'s name, and I had the power of attorney to do all of that.
And so for people outside of like the tech investment space, what's become really popular, especially in more of the traditional tech markets, is investing in small like startup companies via a SAFE agreement, basically a fancy IOU. I'm going to give you this money now. We don't know what your company is really going to be worth. So we're just going to give you this money, but we're going to get our equity when you go raise a more professional round. And so basically the money that we put in now is going to convert to equity when your company is actually evaluated as part of that larger professional fundraising
Do you
round.
agree with what he just said?
Or
Or do you want to add anything to that?
The one cashier, they are no demand, no date set. It might never get converted.
Right.
Because if I put money in you and you just kept running your company and you never went and raised other money, I can't force you to put me in. I have an IOU, but it had no demand date. It had no maturity date. It sits there.
Yes.
Wow.
So
And so those are from an investor viewpoint, a SAFE agreement is not a good idea.
Yep.
From an entrepreneurial viewpoint, it is.
Right.
And that is the primary difference between the SAFE agreement and a convertible note. Because a convertible note has a maturity date to
Gotcha.
it.
Yep.
And so at that point, I can come to you and force you to do something.
Yeah.
either you're going to start paying me back in cash or you're going to start paying me back in equity.
Yeah.
But yeah, the safe notes have become popular. There's this very large tech incubator accelerator organization that will write $500,000 checks investing in companies, and they do it on a safe agreement. Just because as it is more founder friendly, it's also when you're making hundreds of investments every year, you don't want to have to go through the diligence of actually working with lawyers to come up with, you know, hey, you're going to get this much equity for 10% of the company, and that's going to value the company at $1 million. But then you might have to do $40,000 worth of legal work to,
Right.
you know, finalize that agreement.
Right.
But-
Now the one
Yeah.
caveat to that, though, in the state agreement, you do have a valuation cap.
Yep.
It says that once you do something, that I can convert my equity amount not greater than this number.
So-
even if you are converting at 100 million valuation, I might have a 10 million valuation cap. So you do still have to
Right.
do some of the
Diligence, yeah, making sure you're not signing your life or your company away, right? Because there's supposed to be like the standardized safe agreement that, you know, this company YC makes available for others to use. But then, of course, people can go in and modify it, and then you're signing terms that you thought were standardized that weren't really standardized. But yeah, to the point about the valuation cap, that's another way that they can be kind of treated like convertible notes to some degree. Instead of saying, hey, if 3 years you haven't raised any more capital, so like I'm stuck with this safe agreement, you know, you could say, well, we're going to put a valuation cap at, you know, $250,000 for $25,000, right? And so basically, if we were to go raise money at $1 million valuation, they're actually, the investor with the safe agreement is actually going to have their money converted to equity at a $250,000 valuation.
Right.
So in any case, I wanted to just kind of explain what safe agreements are in like kind of the modern context, because those didn't exist back when you and John started investing in small startup companies. So
Nope.
What was that like? Again, convertible notes predominantly, or?
convertible notes were the primary and our equity. We actually did do equity agreements, but primary convertible notes. And at the time we began I might, like my former VP of sales had come in and put money in under the convertible note. Then I came in and signed one. So they were not all done at the same time. Where today you do more group of angels coming in together and signing.
Everyone getting the same terms by and large. Yeah.
Well, right. And technically, well, legally you should give same term, but sometimes people don't tend to do that. But the convertible note, and then equity, because we did, we would value companies and try to do equity in some cases, because particularly if they were multiple people coming in, and the amount that would be raised, that drove part of it.
And yeah, I guess with the amount of being raised, what was it like for, let's say a company needing to raise X number of dollars, let's say, a few $1 million, but they're probably not even worth a few $1 million yet. How do you kind of bridge that gap, or were those not investments that ever really made sense for you?
Those would not make sense, but you could, and to probably raising say $1 million, you might have to get 10 different people, and in the beginning that meant going out and finding 10 different people. They weren't places you could go to find angels back in those days, so you had to work hard to raise money.
I know that
in those days.
I know that's even something Jeff Bezos, even on the West Coast, I think predominantly Seattle, did some of his fundraising in New York. The most difficult thing he's ever done in his life, still to this day, raising that first $1 million for Amazon.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And yeah, that's like, oh, wow, who wouldn't just invest in Jeff Bezos? Easy to say in hindsight, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, in hindsight. Yeah. Well, remember he began out as a bookseller.
Yeah.
Right.
But even before, like, he was a bookseller, he was working in Wall Street, working a very lucrative job, and it was just, he was about my age now, 28, and it's like, hey, do I want to continue living this life, or do I really want to pursue what my calling really is, and doing something with the internet, as he recalls it, and books were what were easy to package, produce, they were standardized, and so it was kind of like the easiest of what's left to be sold on the internet that no one else had capitalized on.
Yeah.
But this isn't about Jeff Bezos. So going back to making some of those early original investments, a lot of those were done equity deals. And again, just to clarify that, hey, we think you're worth $1 million right now. We're raising $100,000. Therefore, you're going to get 10% of the company, right? So what were some of those earliest investments that stood out to you? Maybe some that, wow, this like really surprised me from how quickly and how large it grew into. And then maybe it's like, how the heck did I, think, and maybe not mentioning those by name, but are there any of those early investment stories that stick out?
Oh, yeah. Well, you look at internet security, Tom Noonan and Chris Klaus. You remember the internet really came about in 94 and 95. Well, Chris had already developed a security software package. But the question was, when were people going to buy security for the internet? We all believed that it would be bought. It was a question of timing. So Chris had come out with his, and, there are a number of stories that could be told about how we got involved, but we wound up putting money in 96. And that was the beginning of when they really got outside. We were like the first true institutional type money. We were an angel, we were more like an institution in some ways. So we were the first institutional money in 96. They went public in 98.
And really quick, just to pause here, using terms of today, they were probably at the point of raising what would be considered a seed round, which probably wasn't necessarily called that at the time, or?
Right, no, it would not. It was the A round.
Yeah.
Well, that whole different conversation we could have about names. And so so they went public in 98, and then they operated under IB, a public company until 2006 when they got bought by IBM for $1.3 billion. Now, when you invest in particularly young companies, you hope they do well, you hope for a 10x return, but in the case of ISS, we wound up with a 30x return.
And I think I heard the best ever example that, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, kind of led to your title becoming the Godfather of angel investing in Atlanta, Georgia, the Southeast. I've heard it, all those ways. I forget the name of the company, a healthcare company that I think ended up being 180 times return.
It was called Tradex.
Tradex, okay. Yep.
It was a marketplace where you were bringing buyers and sellers together, and they had to buy software. Company originally began in Tampa. We were the first outside institutional investor in that deal, and that was made in '96 also, and it got sold in December of '99, but we didn't close till March of 2000 for the paperwork. We took an equity position in the new company, and we took a gamble. We agreed to take all of the upside, but we also took all of the downside. So Ariba shares went up, we got the benefit. Ariba shares went down, we took the loss. Ariba shares tripled in value in 3 months. Wow. So we went from a $1.8 billion deal to a $5.7 billion deal. 4 years, 180 to 1 return.
Wow.
That's
a record, isn't it? Or
in the Southeast.
Yeah, okay.
For a non-pharmaceutical, non-bio venture-backed deal.
Wow.
Yeah, and not just at the time, still to this day.
Yeah.
Right. But, you got companies here like MailChimp that have sold for significantly more, but they were not venture-backed. MailChimp never took outside money.
Yeah, $19 billion later, then selling to Intuit or QuickBooks.
Nice.
But outside those, early success stories, you've continued to become more and more involved in the Atlanta tech space. What have you seen, from those earlier days that has evolved over time that has really made an impact on both your involvement as well as the companies being built here?
Well, I think one of the things is that you have seen that Atlanta had become a very Mecca-type place for underrepresented minorities. I think we have done a great job at opening up the city to all races, creed, colors, and particularly in the entrepreneurial world.
Yep.
But you also have seen continued involvement, robotics, drones. You can look at AI, but everybody can talk about AI. Healthcare, we continue to do well. Cybersecurity, we are doing. We have gotten very good supply chain. Though they are a number of different industries that we have done and our categories that we have done very well in. And I am a big believer that we should capitalize on those and not try to be all things to all people.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's very much eating your own dog food in the sense. I mean, it's common to say focus, on one or a few small areas and, kind of grow or expand from there as it makes sense, if it makes sense. But I mean, looking at it the same way, not just from a pure business operational perspective, but also from an investment perspective.
But then you also, you think back to it, and go back to it really 1990. They were one incubator in town when we began doing angel investing. That was the ATDC. They were one venture capital firm in town. That was Mosley. By the way, I'm not kin to Mosley. I keep trying, but they don't take me. And so, things how you look at the number of VC firms we have now, I'm not even sure I can count them all. You look at the number of incubators, you look at what ATV had done, you look at the Russell Innovation Center, you look at the hatchery at Emory. You can just see, you look at what is going on at Kennesaw, you look at what's going on at Morehouse. The growth had just been tremendous. And, I'm glad that I have been around to help participate in that growth. But, coming back to all of it, if we had not sold MSA in 1990 and got to where we could do our angel investing,
we want to have the same community that we have today, right?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Now, as much as I wanted to focus this around, pardon the way that I frame it, it might be a little, unpolished, but talking about your rags to riches story, right? But Sig, as the person, I would like to think that you've had a lot of experiences in and around Atlanta that, being a native, Metro Atlanta, calling Jasper Metro Atlanta might be a little bit of a stretch.
That is French.
Yeah. More and more so it's becoming the case. I think in our last episode, we talked about eventually the whole state of Georgia is going to become Atlanta, or, obviously, that's hyperbole to some degree. But in any case, what sort of go-to spots, if you will, do you have? Do you have any, maybe you don't want to blow up your favorite restaurant, have a bunch of people showing up there, but just from living in Atlanta, what's really stood out to you outside of, the work environment, tech environment? What's continue to make Atlanta home for you? And what stands out about it?
Well, I just love the city, even though traffic can be horrible. It doesn't bother me that much. You just know people are going to do crazy things, so just be prepared. And I think thing right, bringing the breeze to Atlanta. When Ivan Allen brought the Atlanta breeze to the town with Ted Turner,
Yep.
And seeing the continuing growth of the Braves. You look at the original Fulton County Stadium. Then you look at the 1996 Olympics and what they were able to do for the city. A lot of people don't realize that Atlanta is the second most connected city in the U.S. And the reason why we are is because of the Olympics. So you have people like Billy Payne, Andrew Young, those people who were involved in bringing the Olympics. Look at what we have been able to do with the city. Now you look at, we did have the Georgia Dome. Now we have Mercedes-Benz. We have the Slate Farm Arena. Now we have one up in Gwinnett. Just look at the way the city had matured along the way. Look at the Woodard Art Center.
Right.
Beautiful thing. Getting some much-needed renovation now. So this city had continued to grow. It had continued to evolve. Restaurants, now there are hundreds of restaurants in town. I have my share that I like. I still like diversity.
That's a fixture in Atlanta, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is a fixture here. Look at how Georgia Tech had grown. So it used to be on the west side of I-75. Now it had come across to the east side.
It's all a Midtown, it seems like.
Right, it is. So you look at that, you look at what KSU had become, look at what Georgia State is becoming and has become. You just got all of the educational institutions. The city had grown as a city. Now, we have had our fair share of problems along the way. And we still have, it will be a problem.
Till we get drone travel, but
aging infrastructure. But those are just growing pains. So,
right.
Because if you go back and really look at Atlanta and Birmingham were not that much different
Wow.
at the beginning of the 20th century.
And that's
Gosh,
hearsay
that's
for me to think about now.
That's amazing too,
Yeah.
to think
And
about
just see how it, and the one thing I think that it probably the most critical of that had probably been the airport and how we have grown that airport. And again, they go back to a great politician, William B. Hartsfield, who had the vision to get that airport and to keep it growing. Then Maynard Jackson came into that. So, we have had great visionaries, Coke, started here. And of course, Home Depot with Otto and Bernie.
Truett Cathy with Chick-fil-A as well.
Yeah.
Right, you look out, we have great opportunity, we have great people, we have great businesses. Education is something, secondary education, in the public schools, that's something we could work on.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I mean, a lot of it's growing. I know a lot of with Georgia Tech, I mean, it's continuing to grow at a gangbusters sort of rate. I mean, the involvement that people have from an AI perspective. I know you talked about, I've seen Chris Klaus post about it, how like Georgia Tech is leading the way there. But going back to what we were talking about, even from a cultural standpoint, a lot of it is nowadays the kids around here are being told a lot, if you're not becoming a software developer, getting into IT, like from a software perspective, you're almost treated like an idiot, right? And it's totally opposite. You go to a place like Japan, or even just you go up north, Midwest, like if you're not providing something of value tangibly with your hands, building something, providing it to someone else, you're looked at lesser than, right? And so that's, I think, one of the areas that is changing, and I think needs to continue changing, because I think we've gotten so used to how great life is, not just here in the Southeast, but, across the nation, that it's all from a basis of consumption, right? And obviously there's a lot of value created with software and software alone, but oftentimes, and almost every time, it needs to be paired with a device, right? Something physical that's being made. And I think that's been not just within the Southeast or Metro Atlanta, but around the country, been a perspective that's been lost. But if you're looking to get outside of the city and kind of like wrapping it up here, are there any like sort of go-to spots like, hey, I'm looking to kick back still within Georgia? Do you ever go back to Jasper or any other areas that, hey, I'm wanting to escape the noise, or you're just all in the noise all the time? Yeah.
Well, I escape, but not in Georgia. I go outside of Georgia to get away from the noise. I enjoy going to certain parts of Florida, even though I don't like hurricanes. You got Jamaica, you got Costa Rica. And for those of you who don't know, Charles Brewer, who used to be an entrepreneur here, had built a town in Costa Rica, a very interesting place to visit. I like St. Lucia. I'm a beach type person, and I keep trying to find the best place to go with the least number of hurricanes.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I was getting in the way of your video feed. But I love to hear that. So obviously...
You're too close to your mic.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. So, yeah, you like to get out of the state, to get out of the noise, so to speak. But anything else that we haven't covered as of yet that you wanted to touch on, maybe to, again, tell your story that hasn't been told, publicly, that most people don't know about you, that you think really kind of gives people another look of Sig that they don't typically see?
Well, people always ask what I do when I don't work. And I give the same answer, and the true answer. I enjoy reading, I enjoy traveling, I enjoy drinking red wine, and not necessarily in that order, any mean. But,
Sometimes at the same time.
Well, yes, I do enjoy travel. Last year I went to Tanzania and Zanzibar. The year before that, I went to Thailand and Bali, and in 23, I took my first 5-week vacation. I had never been gone that long, but you need to be when you go to that part of the world.
Yep.
And so, and I will continue to do more traveling.
So I guess outside of like the areas that you just mentioned to like kind of escape like Florida, Costa Rica, some more local, have there been any places that you've gone to that really stand out from, just the beauty of the place, the people that live in that place, the architecture or history? What sort of stands out to you when you go to those places, and which places stand out the most?
Well, I don't know why I love Hong Kong.
Okay.
I've been a couple of times, and it is a very busy city. I do love it, and maybe that's why I love Atlanta too, but I don't know. But I also enjoy Amsterdam. Amsterdam, nice. I could go to Amsterdam any number of times.
Nice. I want to just ask, and it can be a brief answer because we've gone on kind of long here, so I don't want to take this any longer of your time, but do you have any regrets, business-wise especially? Anything, if you could go back and do over, you would change?
No, I don't think I do.
That's a good thing to be in that position to be able to say that. So.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think that came from? I mean, because just honestly, I've grown up with a lot of older people that maybe not verbalize regrets that they have, but you could tell like that they didn't live the life that they wanted to live, right? So did you just always have that wherewithal, like, hey, this is no respawns, I get my one life to make what I want out of it? Or it just happened to work out that you were present, most of the way? And
I think a lot of it, I was in the right place at the right time, because, they have been times like when MSA were in the bankruptcy, and we were getting paid week to week, and we didn't know we were going to get paid. I'll be honest, I looked around for a couple of opportunities, but I never found anything that I thought I would enjoy in what I was doing. And that's the other thing. I enjoy my work. I don't view it as work. I just love doing it. I love being around entrepreneurs. I love helping build businesses. And so I have just found that is a passion that I have. And I believe that you need to have that passion to when you're in the business world.
Well, that's great. That's powerful. I've heard it before from entrepreneurs. So, yeah.
well, Sig, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. Looking forward to the event on April 19th.
No, 29th.
Yes, I'm so sorry. April 29th. If anyone wants to maybe come speak a few words with Sig himself, asking questions that Jim and I did not think to ask him, honoring a legacy, Sig Mosley's impact on Southeast Venture, April 29th, 2025, 6:30 p.m. If you look at Thai Atlanta and search Sig Mosley, you'll be able to find it, and we'll also have it in the link in the description. So again, Sig, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. All right. Great. Man, enjoyed that.
And